Karen was halfway through shouting over the megaphone about community unity when the first hippo barreled through the popcorn stand. People screamed. A Ferris wheel operator dove off the controls. Cotton candy flew like shrapnel. And there, standing dead center in the chaos, was me. Arms crossed, unbothered, as 30 federally protected pygmy hippos reclaimed my island one overturned churro cart at a time. They built an amusement park on my land. And would you believe they actually tried to charge me admission to enter my own property? They didn't know I owned the hippos. I came back to my private island expecting peace, solitude. The clean slap of salt air and the sound of my own boots crunching along the dock, not the tinny shriek of pop music and the laughter of 50 unsupervised children cannonballing off the edge of my private pier. My boat hadn't even fully docked before I realized something was off. First clue? The oversized vinyl banner stretched between 2 palm trees at the landing. Welcome to Sunset Shoals, a community family fun zone. Sponsored by Bay Ridge OA. The hell it was. This was no HOA property. This was my island, legally titled, privately zoned, and specifically restricted from public access under state maritime law. I stood there frozen, duffel bag still slung over my shoulder, watching what could only be described as a suburban fever dream unspooling across my own land. There were vendor tents where my mango orchard used to be. A spinning teacup ride occupied the bluff where I'd buried my dog Scout 5 years ago. The shallow end of the lagoon had been transformed into a splash park, complete with PVC slides and inflatable flamingos. And there, at the center of it all, wearing an HOA-logoed polo shirt and a megaphone strapped to her hip, was her, Karen, the high queen of cul-de-sac tyranny. Blonde bob unmoved by the breeze, lips pursed like a lemon rind, clipboard in one hand like it doubled as scripture. She saw me before I spoke, turned that plastic pageant smile toward me like she hadn't just hijacked my land, and called it communal enrichment. "Oh good," she chirped into the megaphone. Though I was less than 20 feet away, he made it just in time for today's group canoe launch. Everyone, wave to the landowner. Applause broke out. Applause. I didn't return the gesture. I walked straight down the dock, past a teenager in a faded lifeguard tank top who offered me a snow cone, past a family of 5 arguing over map directions labeled Pirate Island Adventure Trail, until I stood at the main gate that used to separate my private house from the rest of the island. It had been replaced. The old cedar slats I hand-cut years ago were gone, ripped out and replaced with aluminum fencing that matched the HOA's pool gates back in the mainland subdivision. My keypad was gone. My locks had been changed. I typed in my backup code just in case. Nothing. I knocked. No answer. I pulled out my phone, ready to call the caretaker who normally checked in once a week to water the garden and feed the hippos. But the call didn't go through. No signal. Karen sauntered over like she was leading a tour of Versailles. "Isn't it just fabulous?" she said, gesturing to the chaos behind her. "We've had so much positive feedback already. I knew you'd love it once you saw it in person." I didn't answer. I just stared at her, mouth tight, hands clenched behind my back. "You're trespassing," I said. "Every single one of you." Her eyes sparkled with the kind of smugness that only came from years of HOA power trips and unchecked authority. "Actually," she said, drawing out the word like it was soaked in syrup, "you signed a temporary lease agreement 2 months ago. It's on file. Our legal team has it, if you'd like to take a look." I blinked. I never signed any such thing. "You absolutely did," she said, pulling out a laminated document from her tote bag. "Initialed right here. Dated. Witnessed. Filed with the community council. So, technically, this land has been subleased to Bay Ridge HOA for 3 more weeks. We're calling it the Summer Share Initiative. It's part of our new community expansion plan. Isn't that exciting?" I took the laminated paper from her and scanned it. My name was there. My signature, forged, just shaky enough to pass if you didn't know my real hand. "This is fake," I said. "That's a felony." "Oh, we had it notarized," she replied airily, waving her hand toward a man in a folding chair wearing flip-flops and a polo embroidered with HOA Compliance Officer. "Barry handled it. He's very thorough." Barry was nodding, sipping from a large styrofoam cup like this was just another Tuesday. Great rates on bounce house rentals too, he offered. I turned back to Karen. Get off my property, now! She gave a little sigh, like I was being difficult on purpose. I'm really going to need you to lower your tone, she said. This is a shared environment now. We're promoting neighborhood harmony. All homeowners benefit from community attractions. That's what we're about. That's what you signed up for when you moved into Bay Ridge. I didn't move. Didn't blink. This island isn't part of Bay Ridge, I said. It's zoned independently. It's off-grid. It's under separate deed and maritime zoning. I've never signed it over to any HOA jurisdiction. Karen clicked her tongue and patted my shoulder like she was dealing with a child who had wandered into the wrong classroom. You might want to review your easement clauses. We had a zoning specialist comb through everything. Your offshore parcel designation leaves some wiggle room for seasonal use under Open District Code. And once the HOA board voted, it was practically automatic. Technically, it's a form of communal reallocation, perfectly legal. You forged my signature. Tomato. Tomato, she chirped. You really ought to stop getting so worked up. We've had record turnout. Over 800 guests last weekend alone. There's a churro truck on the bluff, and tonight is fireworks. Fireworks? I repeated. You're setting off fireworks on a federally registered conservation site? Oh, don't be dramatic, she said, laughing. We're not using real explosives. They're drone-based, very tasteful, very modern. I turned away before I threw something. Walked around the backside of the gate, through the tree line, past the Karen's Crab Shack sign nailed to what used to be my solar tool shed, and toward the maintenance path I knew they hadn't found. It led around the bluff, behind the mangroves, and up to the utility hatch near the cellar entrance. But when I got there, even the hatch had been padlocked with new hardware. A community storage sign had been bolted to the door. Every access point, every entrance, every key, gone. My home had been occupied like a foreign embassy, and I was the one being treated like the outsider. When I doubled back to confront her again, Karen had already moved on, barking instructions into her headset, while HOA volunteers in matching vests herded guests toward a long line of bumper boats made from converted fishing kayaks. Kids ran screaming past me, splashing soda and dragging muddy shoes through what used to be my meditation garden. My hippos, thank God, were nowhere in sight. Probably still in the southern basin, where they had plenty of space and stayed away from crowds. But the fact that Karen didn't even know they existed yet? That meant she hadn't done her full due diligence. That meant I had time. I stood there a moment longer, watching my island crawl with HOA foot soldiers and oblivious families who thought this was just some idyllic seaside carnival. I stared at my locked house. At the vendors profiting off land they didn't own. At the laminated fake documents, and the smug, syrupy voice of a woman who thought a clipboard gave her the right to invade, rebrand, and monetize someone else's world. They thought they had outmaneuvered me. They thought I was just some absentee landowner who wouldn't notice until it was too late, but they had no idea who I really was, and worse for them, they had no clue what I kept on this island, or why it was the last place anyone should ever try to claim without permission. I didn't sleep that night. I paced the edges of my own island like a trespasser, tracing footpaths I'd carved myself a decade ago, now littered with confetti, broken glow sticks, and paper wristbands that read Sunset Shoals VIP. I finally found a way inside the house just after 3 a.m. A crawl space panel behind the generator that no one on Karen's land improvement team had discovered yet. It took me 30 minutes with a pry bar and flashlight, but I emerged into my own cellar, soaked in sweat, covered in dirt, and angrier than I'd ever been in my life, and that was before I saw the damage. My wine cellar, converted years ago to store archival footage, legal documents, land surveys, and rare conservation permits, was now a storage dump for park supplies, broken pool floaties, crushed soda boxes, and a pile of HOA Carnival volunteer vests were stacked in crates labeled with HOA logos. Someone had thrown out my waterlogged map collection, topographical renderings I'd collected over 20 years, right into a garbage bin full of melted cotton candy. The real kicker? My framed deed, which once hung on the entry wall, was now cracked in half, glass shards still on the floor, and in its place, a corkboard filled with volunteer sign-up sheets and a flyer titled, "Your Island, Your Community. Be part of the magic." I stood there, dead silent, letting the bile in my throat settle. Then I went upstairs, and it only got worse. My furniture was rearranged. My office had been converted into a makeshift first aid room, complete with generic white cots and a sign taped to the wall that read, "All boo-boos must be reported to Supervisor Beverly." My kitchen pantry had been raided, entire shelves cleared out, my reserve supply of imported teas replaced with cheap powdered lemonade and off-brand energy bars. I opened the fridge. Inside, next to an open jug of Sunny D, sat a hamster in a plastic ball. I had no idea why. When I reached the main living room, I found what was left of my floors, once Brazilian cherry wood, now warped and wet from water park runoff. A pipe had burst somewhere. I followed the mildew stench into the back hallway. That's when I found the first septic reroute. A PVC maze of amateur plumbing had been bolted into the walls, redirecting what was clearly bathroom waste from some new restroom station outside into what used to be my linen closet. They didn't even seal it properly. I stepped in something that made me gag. Upstairs, a pair of teenagers were asleep in what used to be my guest suite. HOA interns, according to the lanyards hanging on the bedposts. They'd left an open pizza box on the nightstand, along with a walkie-talkie and a spiral notebook filled with notes titled, "Karen's Morning Briefings." I didn't wake them. I just stared. I felt like a ghost haunting my own property. Like I'd died and someone had tried to gentrify my grave. When the sun came up, I left through the side veranda, what used to be my morning coffee spot. The view was now obstructed by a cotton candy booth and something called the Critter Caravan. At least, it had been called that. The pen was empty now, save for a sick-looking parrot hunched in the corner, feathers half missing, food tray overturned. A sign read, "Please don't tap glass. Exotic animals need quiet." I found another enclosure further down the bluff, this one labeled, "Rainforest Reptile Roundup." All that remained was a tipped-over iguana cage and an empty heat lamp, abandoned, forgotten. The animals were gone. Or worse, I kept walking. The garden I'd spent years cultivating was nothing but trampling marks and food wrappers. Someone had set up a mini golf course over my koi pond. I followed the trail of damage, snapping photos on my phone, what little battery I had left. Since the HOA had also disabled the off-grid solar storage inverter and instead plugged half the island into 2 gas generators humming in the beachside cabana. By the time I made it back to the main promenade, a phrase I never wanted to associate with my land, I was done being quiet. I marched up to the front gate, where a new welcome center had been built with plywood, folding tables, and a touchscreen kiosk that proudly looped a slideshow titled, "How the HOA Saved Sunset Shoals." I ripped the cord from the monitor. Karen was there in minutes. She arrived in a golf cart marked Operations, flanked by 2 men in black shirts with earpieces. "You're not authorized to tamper with park equipment," she said, not even pretending anymore. "You need to leave this area immediately." I laughed. "This is my island." "Correction," she said, holding up a printed packet of HOA documents thick enough to bruise someone. "This is an active community event space, sanctioned under Emergency Ordinance 12B, filed under our Coastal Usage Annex. You're in violation of HOA protocol by interfering with pre-approved infrastructure. You rerouted sewage into my house. That was a necessary measure to handle foot traffic," she replied, without blinking. "The septic system was insufficient for our needs. Our contractors installed temporary reroutes in accordance with our sanitation subcontractors. All paid, all documented. The exotic animals you abandoned?" I snapped. "The endangered koi pond you paved over? The septic tank you installed in my goddamn hallway? This isn't just illegal, it's grotesque." Karen's face went cold. She leaned in close, lowering her voice. "I know you think this place is your little sanctuary, but the truth is, you haven't lived here in months. You think that gives you ownership? We've been here. We've built something. The people love it. The children love it. And you want to shut it down. For what? Your Hippo vanity project? You're lucky I haven't called the feds already." "Oh, but you did," she said, smiling. We intercepted your first complaint to the Coast Guard. That's why we had our legal team issue a countersuit. You'll find the packet in your kitchen, though I doubt you can get in there anymore." I didn't answer. I pulled out my phone again. Dialed 911. Nothing. Still, no signal. Karen clicked her tongue. "Oh, right. We had the signal dampeners installed to protect the children from EMF exposure. Your little emergency calls won't work here anymore, but feel free to send a letter, assuming you can find a post office on the mainland that still accepts yours." Then she did something that truly broke me. She turned to her two goons and said, "Escort Mr. Ellis to the perimeter fence. His behavior is making our guests uncomfortable." "This is my land," I shouted, but the guards had already stepped between us. "You don't touch me," one of them shrugged. "You're creating a hostile environment, sir. You're being removed for safety." "You're trespassing. We're the caretakers now," the man said, like it was a prayer. They took me by the arms, not violently, but firmly, and walked me across my own beach. Past the guests, past the gawking children, past the vendors selling Sunset Shoals branded water bottles. I could hear someone whispering, "Is that the guy?" "That's the guy who wants to shut it all down. Why does he look so mad?" A woman I didn't recognize was filming me with her phone. "This is the landowner," she narrated. "Apparently he hates fun." The next day, I woke to a headline pinging through my backup sat device. I had rigged it before the HOA cut my power. A national news blog had picked up the story. The title read, "Millionaire Landowner Threatens Children's Park. HOA Faces Island Uprising." The article painted me as some deranged eccentric who'd stormed a family attraction and yelled at volunteers. Karen's quote was front and center. "We just want to give the community something beautiful." I'm shocked and saddened that anyone would threaten that kind of joy. There was no mention of the forged documents. No mention of the septic tanks or the exotic animal neglect. No mention of the fact that I hadn't stepped foot on my own property in less than 12 hours without being removed by force. The world didn't see a man trying to protect what was his. They saw a villain interrupting the fairy tale. And Karen had written the whole damn story. But she forgot something crucial. This wasn't her stage. And she had no idea who really owned the ending. I played along. For 2 full days, I walked to the edge of the community park in silence, taking notes like some defeated landlord with no fight left. I wore sunglasses and kept my hood up, nodding politely when vendors waved and HOA volunteers chirped their good mornings with forced cheer. I let them believe I had accepted my role as the island's disgraced former ruler, dethroned by taffy carts and tandem kayaks. I even clapped during their afternoon drum circle. But behind the shades, my eyes didn't blink. I watched. I mapped. I cataloged every violation, every unauthorized structure, every disturbed shoreline and makeshift garbage pit they dug where my endangered sedgegrass used to grow. I logged every sound decibel, every drone flight, every vehicle offloading supplies without permits. And then I opened a locked cabinet in the crawl space. Inside were 3 things: a satellite relay module, a secured black case containing conservation license docs, and a flash drive that hadn't seen daylight since I first applied for the program 7 years ago. It was time to remind the world what this island really was. You see, Sunset Shoals wasn't just private property. It wasn't just a beachfront playground. It was, by federal classification, a live research habitat protected under Title 50 of the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, because I was the registered caretaker of 30 pygmy hippos, imported from a dwindling Ugandan reserve as part of a 10-year translocation conservation program. The public thought hippos were slow, cute lawn ornaments with stubby legs and cartoon smiles. But pygmy hippos? They were living bulldozers the size of jet skis, capable of breaking a man's femur with one sideways bump. And they weren't pets. They were classified invasive species deterrents, legally protected, biologically irreplaceable. And I owned every single one. The best part? Under federal environmental law, any entity that interfered with or endangered those animals, or compromised the integrity of their controlled habitat, was in violation of multiple overlapping statutes: endangered species protections, conservation fraud, and unlawful biological displacement. In short, every bounce house Karen had inflated, every funnel cake station she'd set up within 500 yards of the Hippos' southern enclosure, was a ticking legal time bomb, and I had footage. So I activated the SAT relay and pinged 3 contacts I hadn't spoken to in years. One was a wildlife enforcement officer named Harper who owed me a favor from the early days of the hippo licensing wars. Another was a federal ecologist with the Department of Coastal Resilience, a man who had once drunkenly told me at a symposium that he'd love a reason to bulldoze an HOA just for sport. The third was a deputy special counsel with the Interior Department, an old college classmate I once saved from academic probation, and who now specialized in prosecuting violations of protected species charters. I sent them the footage. Every contaminated runoff trench, every trampled breeding zone, every single clip of Karen's HOA volunteers dragging tents across the marsh buffer zones. Within 12 hours, I had 3 responses. The ecologist replied first, "Are you kidding me? That's an EPA suit waiting to happen." The wildlife enforcement officer texted me a single line. "Do the hippos still have tracking tags?" They did. And I had live GPS data showing their disrupted movement patterns, especially after that Saturday fireworks display Karen claimed was drone-based and environmentally gentle. The flashbangs had sent half the herd into the northeastern grove, a restricted zone where no sound levels above 40 decibels were permitted. The tracking data showed elevated pacing, abnormal territory avoidance, and clear stress response markers. I packaged everything into a single report, titled it Critical Disturbance of Federally Protected Species and Deliberate Sabotage of Conservation Territory, and sent it under secure encryption to all 3. Then I waited and watched. Karen, of course, had no idea. She thought she was winning. On Monday morning, she hosted a pancake breakfast at the main courtyard, complete with a step-and-repeat photo booth where children could pose in front of a giant cardboard cutout of a hippo holding a sign that read, "I-3 Sunset Shoals." I nearly laughed. The irony was so dense it could have sunk the whole island. She didn't know those smiling cardboard cutouts were the PR equivalent of walking into a minefield. Because the second you commercialized a protected species without federal clearance, you weren't just tacky, you were criminally liable. I took photos, sent them to Harper. "Unauthorized likeness?" I asked. His response came within minutes. "Absolutely. Trademark violation and misrepresentation. Keep going." So I did. That afternoon, I took a walk past the snack shacks and souvenir tents, and slipped into the old rainwater tower that still overlooked the southern lagoon. From the top platform, I had a clear view of the hippo zone. They were huddled, 30 of them, spooked, irritated, clustered in ways they never had before. I counted their GPS pings, all accounted for. Still here, still legal, and very much not amused. I took photos, compiled audio data, used an old hydrophone to capture the unnatural water disruption caused by the paddle boats Karen had allowed in the lagoon, which violated the silent zone agreement written into my conservation charter. When I ran the audio through a stress response analyzer the feds had given me back in 2019, the results were clear. 3 days of elevated aggression indicators. The hippos were on edge. And if one of those creatures lashed out at a child during one of Karen's sunset canoe tours, God help them. Because legally, that liability wouldn't fall on me. It would fall on her. I printed the analysis, compiled everything into a single folder. Then I handed it to a man in sunglasses who arrived by unmarked boat on Wednesday evening. He didn't say much. Just stepped onto the dock, gave me a nod, and asked, "They still feeding the parrots donuts?" I blinked. "You saw that?" "Coast Guard drone picked it up yesterday. We've been watching for a few days. Just needed you to make the first report, which you did." He took the folder, opened the top flap, smiled. "You're going to want to stay out of the blast radius, Mr. Ellis. You're bringing charges? We're bringing the alphabet," he said. USFWS, EPA, Docker. Hell, I think the NOAA boys want a bite too. What about Karen? We're not just going after her, we're going after the entire HOA shell. Half those LLCs she's using are tangled in shady tax schemes. You did good." "I'm not done yet." "Didn't think you were," he said, stepping back onto the boat. "Just keep the hippos calm for 72 hours. After that, They'll be the only things on this island still left standing. The boat pulled away, silent, cutting a clean wake across the water. I stood there long after he disappeared, listening to the wind shift through the mangroves and the distant low grunts of the hippos. My hippos, huddled and waiting. Karen still thought this was a neighborhood dispute, a petty land spat, a fussy millionaire mad about noise. What she didn't realize was that she had desecrated a federally protected biological asset, falsified documents to justify commercial occupation of a conservation zone, and was actively endangering a species she thought was just part of the decor. I didn't need to yell, I didn't need to sue, I didn't need to fight her in the HOA newsletter. I had weaponized federal law, conservation science, and 30 biological tanks that weighed 600 pounds each. The HOA didn't know who they were really messing with, but they were about to find out. It arrived by certified mail, hand-delivered to Karen in the middle of a pancake-flipping demonstration beside the churro cart. She barely glanced at the envelope before smirking at the camera crew from Channel 8 News, who were there to do a fluff piece on the revolutionary community fund model Sunset Shoals was apparently pioneering. I had watched from the tree line, arms folded, hat low over my eyes. I already knew what the letter said. I wrote it myself. A cease and desist, backed by 4 federal statutes and 9 attached exhibits detailing violations ranging from unauthorized commercial use of a conservation site to wildlife harassment to air pollution infractions from her precious drone fireworks. It was stamped, signed, and countersigned by Harper and the DOCR's legal liaison, meaning it wasn't just a letter, it was a warning flare. But when Karen opened it, all she saw was paperwork. "We've got a lawyer in the family," she said with a laugh, waving the envelope like it was confetti. "If he wants to play paperwork games, I hope he likes losing." Someone in the crowd clapped. Another HOA intern, some poor 20-something in an oversized safety vest, asked if she should log the letter into the Sunset file. I had no idea what the Sunset file was. Probably some ridiculous internal code name they'd cooked up for ignoring legal threats. The fact that they had a system for that told me everything I needed to know. Karen wasn't just confident, she was drunk on it. She thought this island was hers now. She thought I was a footnote in her HOA fairy tale. And that's why she didn't just ignore the cease and desist, she answered it with an invitation. A glossy postcard showed up in my mailbox the next morning, personally addressed to me no less. It was printed in glitter font and smelled faintly of coconut sunscreen. "You're invited!" It read in giant block letters, "To the first ever Sunset Shoals Summer Spectacular." There was a DJ lineup, a live-streamed drone show, a dunk tank, labeled "Soak the Grump," featuring a cartoon sketch of me in a frown with little hippos splashing around my feet. Fireworks finale at 9 p.m. sharp, it boasted. Free glow sticks for the first 200 guests. I stared at it for a long time, then slid it into the same envelope as the original cease and desist and handed it to Harper's courier. "Frame it," I told him. "I want that in the evidence folder right next to the drone noise complaints." "You sure you don't want to shut it down early?" he asked. "You've got enough to bury her today." I shook my head. "No, let her build the stage, let her fill the seats, let the camera roll." He raised an eyebrow. "You're not just setting a trap. I'm giving her the microphone," I said. "And I want the whole country to hear what she says when she thinks no one can stop her." For the next 48 hours, I didn't show my face. Karen assumed she'd won. Her HOA newsletter, which she now emailed 3 times a day, claimed legal confusion had been resolved, and the landowner had reached an understanding with the HOA board. She even posted a selfie of herself standing in front of my house, captioned, "When leadership looks like love. So grateful for our new shared vision." I almost vomited. Meanwhile, I coordinated with Harper, the NOAA team, and the DOCR's enforcement unit, cross-referencing every one of Karen's social media posts and vendor transactions against protected land protocols. I found 4 confirmed wildlife code breaches, 3 clear contract forgeries, 2 recorded statements where Karen admitted, on camera, that she had signed for him because he was too stuck up to care about community involvement. That alone was enough to get her prosecuted in 3 states. But I didn't strike. Not yet. Because Karen had unknowingly violated one more law. She had held a public event on federally classified maritime borderlands, See, Sunset Shoals wasn't just a domestic island. It sat precisely on the invisible line between two regional conservation zones, meaning any commercial activity, especially involving more than 100 people, required cross-jurisdictional approval from the Maritime Land Trust and the Department of Environmental Oversight. And not only had she skipped that approval, she had broadcasted the entire event live on 3 streaming platforms, complete with GPS location tags, aerial drone footage, and a public guest list that included several HOA board members who knew the zoning designations. They had, effectively, confessed their crimes in 4K. By the time the summer spectacular began, there were 368 people on the island, and every one of them had unknowingly walked onto the set of a legal documentary. I watched from a camouflage tent on the southern ridge, tracking heat signatures and cell tower pings through a military-grade monitoring tablet Walt had gifted me years ago, in case the squirrels ever unionized. It had a ridiculous cartoon walrus sticker on the back, but it worked like a dream. I tapped through the feeds as the main event ramped up, a stage built over my koi pond, now drained and filled with sand for a beach dance floor. A stage magician performed in front of my greenhouse, which still smelled like diesel after one of Karen's rides leaked oil all over the irrigation system. Somewhere, a child cried near the llama pen. I had no idea where the llamas came from. At 6 p.m., Karen took the main stage, wearing a sparkling blazer and holding a golden microphone. "Let's give it up for our volunteers," she shouted, gesturing behind her where half the HOA board stood in matching khakis, throwing glow sticks into the crowd like candy. "They said it couldn't be done. They said we didn't have the permits. They said we were breaking some kind of law. But look around. Does this look illegal to you?" the crowd roared. Karen grinned. "And to those watching at home," she added, turning to the camera live on 4 platforms, "we're here to prove that when a community unites, even the old rules have to change. We don't need permission to build joy. We are the permission." Behind her, a display lit up showing drone footage of the park, complete with an HOA logo that had been digitally edited onto my front gate. She didn't know that at that exact moment, 3 government agencies were watching the same live stream. She didn't know the Coast Guard had received clearance to dock, or that a U.S. FWS boat with federal marshals on board was hovering just off the southern reef. She didn't know the Interior Department had already drafted charges, because I hadn't struck yet. I was still waiting. Waiting for the grand finale. At 8:45 p.m., the crowd gathered at the beach. Beach balls flew. Pop music blasted. Karen strutted onto a pier built over protected mangroves and lifted a giant button labeled, "Light Up the Night." "Are you ready, Shoals family?" she shouted. Hundreds of voices screamed back. 3, 2, 1. She slammed the button, and the drones took off. Hundreds of them, buzzing into the sky in formation, spelling out her name, the HOA logo, and a giant glowing heart around the words, "Sunset Shoals, a place to belong." People screamed, cheered, filmed it all, posted it, tagged it, and that was the moment I texted Harper a single word: now. 10 minutes later, the first federal boat docked on the north side. Unmarked SUVs rolled up the main path. Officers in plainclothes and uniforms walked calmly through the crowd. A child offered one of them cotton candy. He declined. In 30 minutes, everything would come crashing down. But for now, I stood on the ridge, smiling, as the sky lit up with Karen's name, just before it was legally erased. They didn't hear the boats coming at first. The drone show's humming glow drowned out the rumble of engines. Music thumped. Kids screamed joyfully as another round of glow sticks were launched from the HOA happiness cannon stationed just behind my greenhouse. Karen was on stage again, flanked by board members in branded sashes, preparing to crown a 10-year-old mini mayor of the island. She was mid-sentence, something about community legacy, something nauseating, when the lead Coast Guard vessel breached the cove like a gray ghost. It cut through the water with slow, military precision, slicing between paddle boats and inflatable dolphins until it reached the temporary marina where the HOA had docked their pontoon of frozen yogurt supplies. A single horn blared one long note. That was the signal. Every drone camera feed, every live stream, every TikTok broadcast from the Sunset Shoals Summer Spectacular was now watching live as a platoon of federal wildlife officers disembarked onto the docks. Behind them came the second wave, DOCR prosecutors, Environmental Integrity Division attorneys, and a wall of grim-faced legal investigators in windbreakers. Each one carried a folder. Each folder held indictments. My revenge didn't come with a scream. It came with signatures. It came with agents handing out cease operations notices in triplicate. It came with Karen still holding a golden microphone, jaw slowly unhinging as a uniformed officer took the stage beside her and politely asked her to step down. "I'm sorry. Who exactly do you think you are?" She laughed into the mic, still trying to maintain her stage presence. "This is a family event." "Ma'am," the officer said, calm and even, "you are hereby ordered to cease and desist all operations related to this event. This land has been identified as a protected conservation zone under federal jurisdiction, and your organization is under active investigation for environmental sabotage, unauthorized commercial use of protected habitat, and fraudulent subleasing of federal land." A silence rippled through the crowd. It wasn't fear yet, just confusion. Karen stared, lips trembling slightly, as a man in a charcoal suit stepped forward from the legal team and produced a binder thicker than a cinder block. "We have documentation of falsified contracts, forged signatures, destruction of federally protected flora, and interference with an endangered species habitat. Your organization's shell corporations are under forensic audit, and your HOA board has been named in a RICO investigation for coordinated environmental fraud." "This is absurd," Karen barked. "You don't have jurisdiction. This is a neighborhood matter." "This is a federal matter," the officer cut in. "You've streamed proof of the crimes across 4 social platforms. You held a drone fireworks show in a classified silent zone, hosted unlicensed exotic animals, built structures over restricted mangrove beds, and used forged documentation to seize control of private sovereign land." Karen stumbled back a step. "You can't just—" "You're under arrest," the officer said plainly, "for conspiracy to defraud a protected reserve and willful endangerment of a federally conserved species." And right on cue, almost like I'd planned it for dramatic effect, 30 pygmy hippos crested the ridge behind the crowd. They moved in formation, calm but massive, hooves quiet against the packed earth as they surrounded the festival perimeter. No charging, no growling. Just their presence, calculated and lawful. Each one bore a bright orange conservation collar with embedded tracking chips. They were real, registered, and legally designated as territorial ecosystem barriers, meaning any event interfering with their movement required immediate shutdown. People screamed, not in terror, yet, just in panic. The sight of living, breathing hippos walking shoulder to shoulder around the bounce house zone was enough to make even the most oblivious dad in cargo shorts rethink his family's vacation. Parents grabbed their kids. Vendors began packing up. The cotton candy machine tipped over in the scramble. A man with face paint and a balloon animal crown tried to flee into the mangroves, only to be intercepted by 2 agents who calmly directed him back to the exit. "These animals are real?" someone shouted. "I thought they were just, like, part of the theme." Karen's knees buckled when she turned and saw them, 30 glistening slabs of muscular, grazing enforcement, blinking slowly in the golden light. I watched from the tree line, walkie in hand, as the last drone caught the moment. Karen, arms flailing, escorted down from the stage in plastic cuffs, surrounded by agents and cameras. The footage would be used in 2 congressional hearings and a training video for the Department of Interior. She screamed about bias. She screamed about persecution. She screamed about hostile hippos and weaponized wildlife. It was poetic. Meanwhile, her board members tried to scatter. Beverly was caught near the fudge stand. Craig from compliance made it as far as the temporary kayak shed before being met by a USFWS officer who'd been reading his financials all week. 4 other board members were detained near the coconut bowling alley, sobbing into their embroidered HOA polos as environmental officers took pictures of trampled native reeds beneath their flip-flops. Within an hour, The entire island had been cleared. A federal directive was issued declaring the site closed for restoration and legal review. Every ride, every tent, every inflatable flamingo and branded towel was flagged for removal. Bulldozers arrived by barge that evening. The churro stand was the first to fall. Karen screamed the whole time, until the agents loaded her into the transport boat and someone accidentally dropped her golden microphone into the sea. That moment got clipped, subtitled, and shared 20 million times online under the caption, "Karen goes down with the mic." By sunset, the noise was gone. The children were gone. The music, the trash, the screaming board members, the DJ booth built on top of my septic system, gone. All that remained was the sound of ocean wind and the rustle of palms. The hippos grazed slowly across the lower ridge, unconcerned, calm, at peace again. And me? I stood at the center of the empty field where the main stage once stood. My boots sank into the soft, reclaimed soil. I looked out across the island, now scrubbed clean of plastic signs and HOA slogans. The only logo left was the conservation emblem embossed on my hippo tracking tablet. I walked to the bluff, my bluff, and sat in the old chair I'd buried behind the storage shed after Karen tried to confiscate it for not fitting the community aesthetic. I pulled out a metal thermos, poured a cocktail, bourbon, 2 cubes, and I sat there as the sun dipped low over the water, casting long orange shadows over the hippos roaming freely across my land. Not hers, not the HOA's, not the Sunset Shoals Community Engagement Initiative. Mine. The headlines followed for weeks. HOA empire collapses under wildlife fraud scheme. Hippo hero frees island from HOA tyranny. Feds arrest entire board after fireworks, debacle goes viral. There were indictments. There were resignations. There were suburban HOA presidents across the country who quietly canceled their expansion plans. The message had been received, and the message was this: you don't mess with nature. You don't fake power on paper and expect real ecosystems to play along. You don't forge signatures and bulldoze conservation zones and slap your name on someone else's land, because eventually, the land fights back. And sometimes, it fights with 30 fully legal, federally protected hippos. I sipped my drink, listened to the quiet. One of the larger bulls, Toby, based on his tag, ambled past the shoreline and paused to snort contentedly in my direction. I raised my glass to him. "Good job, boys," I murmured. "The HOA's gone, and you're still standing." I leaned back, let the wind roll over me, and smiled. Peace was never won with noise. It was won with patience, with strategy, with the kind of power that doesn't need a microphone, just a legal license, and a little help from a few 600-pound friends. And finally, after all the noise, after all the banners and bounce houses and golden microphones, peace had come back to my island, and this time it was staying.